Hey guys, I'm back. I wanted to take a minute today to talk about some things that I feel like are important to understand about addiction recovery with regard to your brain. The process of getting over addiction is a major education, frankly. You're going to learn more about yourself in this process than almost anything else you've ever done. Um, Getting addicted is pretty easy. You just kind of go with your feelings and do the things that make you feel better. Getting out of addictive behaviors is dang hard, and it's like going to college. You got a lot to learn. And a lot of what I had to learn was about how my body was actually going through the addiction, what was going on inside me, where the feelings were coming from, and just how to understand the things that I was feeling and experiencing internally. So that education took me down various paths that had to do with especially the brain. So I'm going to use a fairly simple way to describe it, I think, that I'll build on in upcoming videos. For now, I just want to introduce a couple of concepts that I think will be helpful as you think about your own recovery. So the first is that the brain essentially has three levels, as I think of it. Just a very simple way to understand it, three levels: upper, middle, and lower brain. So the upper brain is what I kind of generically call the human brain. It really is what sets us apart from the animals in the way that we function. Medically, you'd call that the neocortex. And that part of the brain thinks in terms of my values, my experiences, the things that I've learned over the years. It's the logical part of the brain. It's the rational part of the brain. It's the part of me that does the thinking. In the Bible, it talks about the mind. And so in the Bible, you're going to hear reference to the mind, the heart, the spirit, different things. Well, I think that when the Bible's talking about the mind, and in the mind one conceives, I really think that we're talking about the human brain there, that upper brain. One other characteristics of that upper brain is that it has the ability to recognize time and the ability to think through a decision with the effect of time. So you can realize, if I eat this now, I won't feel good later. If I do this now, I'll be upset about it later. Or if I save now, I'll have more money in the future, etc. Those kinds of time-based outcomes are very much human brain level stuff. Frontal lobes, upper brain. It's also where the consciousness is of yourself. You know, you kind of notice yourself there. Your consciousness lives in that upper brain, the human brain. So below that, and when I say below, I do mean like right around in here, this middle area: hippocampus, limbic system, amygdala. But it's probably also a lot of these rearward lobes too. So that upper brain is, I think, primarily the frontal lobe. And that frontal lobe is split in half between the two lobes connected by the corpus callosum. And I kind of feel like that's the main upper brain, main human brain. Then below that, doctors will sometimes call that, or researchers will call that, the mammalian brain. And the mammalian brain functions quite a bit differently than the upper brain, the human brain. It's where I think that we learn most of the skills that we just kind of do automatically. Like if you know how to drive a stick, that's happening in that middle brain. When you learn how to do almost everything that you do, just like how do you climb upstairs, how do you shave when you get ready in the morning, how do you comb your hair, how do you wash dishes, just all the millions of things you know how to do that took you some time to learn, but eventually you don't have to consciously think about them. when you do wash the dishes, you just kind of do what you always did. Grab the soap, you do it. You're not really thinking about it. Your brain can be thinking about something else. You might even have a video on, or you're just listening to a podcast or something. You can do a lot of different things at once. When you can do those things at once, it's because a part of your brain is managing it. But things like playing baseball, you throw a ball without even thinking about it, and you can run and jog. Well, those things are just being handled by your brain. And if you're like running through a field and you're stepping in a good spot and then avoiding things that you shouldn't step on, you're not consciously managing all that. Your brain just does it, and it's miracle at doing it. But it also learns how to have relationships there. So, like, how do you interact socially? What can you say to somebody? What can you not say to somebody? So those skills are learned in that middle brain. You're thinking about those things a lot up here in the upper brain too, but then you just kind of learn a lot of just typical relationship dynamics, how to interact with people. That's also why they call it the mammalian brain, because mammals tend to have relationships. They go in herds or in packs, or they group with other animals. So that middle brain, that mammalian brain, has all the functionality for managing social stuff. That's also why we often have we love relationships with animals, especially a dog. A dog's got a very developed mammalian brain, and we relate to them very well. Horses too. A lot of animals, very well developed mammalian brains, and consequently we have really good relationships with those animals because our brains just connect with theirs on that level really, really well. And we think about things, and we are always personifying things for the animal. They're not doing that, but they are really relating to us well because our brains are so similar at that level. The survival mode that we have also is in that middle level. And so a lot of times when we are in a dangerous situation, we drop out of the thinking and we just react, and that's happening in that middle level. Then below that, we have what people would call the lower brain, or what I'm calling the lower brain, but what others might call the reptilian brain. And that's kind of the brain stem, into the nervous system and lower parts. There's a school of research out there called the polyvagal theory, which is connecting, it's recognizing that those main nerves that go down deep into our nervous system and up through the brain, and the various branches of those, and how they relate to these upper and lower brain parts. So that's an interesting topic to get into. But with regard to learning about the brain, for the purposes of most of my discussions, the human brain, the mammalian brain, the reptilian brain are sufficient. What you'll find in the reptilian brain is most of the autonomic functions of the body, such as breathing and heartbeat and sweat and regulation of all the different things going on, digestion. And we don't consciously think about those things. They're just happening. With the exception of breathing, we have control over the breathing, which can be a great technique. I'll discuss that in a second here, for managing some of the things that go on within the brain. So, and another thing that happens is, I mentioned survival mode is kind of in that mammalian level. Well, in that reptilian level is kind of that freeze response. Survival mode tends to be fight or flight. Freeze response is what reptiles do when they are scared. They just freeze and they stop. And mammals can do it too because they have a brainstem. So when an animal is in a very dangerous situation, they will just freeze and their consciousness shuts down, and they what psychologists call disassociate, where they're almost not even experiencing anything they're going through. So that's reptilian brain. So a term that I want to introduce now, which I'll use throughout upcoming videos a lot, is the idea of regulation and dysregulation. So to be regulated is my way of saying, and psychologists will say the same. To be regulated is to be operating out of your human brain, your upper brain, the neocortex. You're making rational, logical decisions, and those are in keeping with your values. Those conscious choices that you've made in the past that, hey, this is the way I'm going to live. The experiences you've been through have informed you with regard to your behaviors, and you are thinking through your choices and taking action based on the things that you've thought about. You're making balanced decisions, meaning an awareness of what do I want to do right now, coupled with what's good for me in the future. These are time-based decisions generally. You've got an eye towards, hey, if I do this now, I'm gonna have to pay for it later, or I won't have the money saved that I need later, or I will cause damage in this relationship if I say this now or do this now. You have a balance between the things you want now versus the things you want in the future. The ability to delay gratification lives here in the human brain and in the frontal lobes. Those decisions have the ability to take into consideration the impact on others, and they're aware of how you might hurt somebody when you're making decisions out of that human brain. So in general, we want to be in that place. So that is what psychologists mean by regulated. Well, to be dysregulated means to drop out of that regulated frontal lobe state and drop down into the middle or the lower brain. And so I previously mentioned survival mode. So to drop into a dysregulated state means generally to come into a survival mode. And in that survival mode, you are making decisions that these lower parts have already previously learned. You're operating more in keeping with automatic responses that you learned at various times in your life about, jump to the side if a car is, going to hit you over, run you over. Well, that's going to be more of an automatic response that you don't even have to think about. The way you might swerve a car out of the way when you're about to be hit, or if an animal's running at you, the way that you would, run out of the way or try to protect yourself. Almost all of that's going to be automatic. And you might even freeze, which is going to be lower brain. The decisions at those times may be good decisions, but they're not logically thought through. It happens too fast, your body just reacts. So you'll also know that in dysregulation, you aren't always thinking, you're really not thinking about a situation, you're just reacting to that situation. So that's the big thing about dysregulation. A key idea or a key thing to know about regulation, dysregulation is that our ability to regulate is picked up by our parents, from our parents. They taught us to regulate. So when we were going through our youth, we don't have any ability to regulate because we don't yet know what's safe and unsafe. So we are watching them as we experience the world to learn that, okay, I'm okay here, I'm not okay here. A baby hears a loud sound and it looks to mom to say, is that okay? Am I all right? And a reassuring, sound or, movement from the mom or a touch or whatever will help that baby to learn that, okay, that's not a dangerous sound. And likewise, if the baby goes through something where they are damaged or injured, or where the parents caused damage, then in those situations, they learn things that aren't helpful. So a parent can create very dysregulating behaviors / you could say skills in a child by not taking good care of them, by neglecting them in various situations, by communicating that they're not loved, that they're not valued, that they're not safe. There's all kinds of things that parents accidentally do and sometimes purposefully do. But we will, going through trauma or relationship disruptions on almost any level, can create situations where the brain learns that I'm not safe in this situation. So we talked a moment ago about how you're always learning skills to manage life. Well, when you go through scary or traumatic situations, you learn skills then too. And those skills are, hey, this is not safe in this situation. And when this happens, I need to do something about it. So that skill is part of your trauma response pattern. So when you go through something stressful or something that reminds you of that previous situation, you're going to react in the way that you learned as a child. So trauma significantly disrupts all these skills that you learn from managing social situations. If you've ever seen somebody react way out of proportion to whatever it is that the conversation requires or the situation requires, it's probably because they are reacting to something they learned in the past. I've heard it said that past is present. When you see somebody reacting way overboard, it's because past is present. So when you are brought back into one of these risky situations, your body's just going to react and you're going to dysregulate. And in those risky situations, they are also painful. They hurt, mentally, and that ends up having a physical reaction. So to the addict, we're frequently trying to medicate that emotional pain. So we've got all these situations in life where we are brought back into an emotionally painful situation, and we're reacting to those emotionally painful situations by medicating with whatever our drug of choice is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, food, shopping, binging on Netflix. There's a million ways that we medicate, and a lot of times we're medicating because we are experiencing emotional pain that brought us out of our frontal lobes and into that middle brain, and now we're kind of in survival mode. And remember, we're not thinking long term in survival mode. So the big picture is, when you drop into survival mode, when you dysregulate, you come out of the frontal lobes, you come into that middle brain, and now that middle brain is taking actions in alignment with skills that it learned a long time ago that say, this is how I manage life when I am going through this dangerous situation. So dysregulation is often the gateway to our acting out. So a couple of things to learn about, this situation, learn about regulation, dysregulation, is to start to notice when you're getting dysregulated. So a common way that I easily get dysregulated is when I'm in a conversation with my wife. We'll be talking about something. She'll start to tell me how some of the things I've done have made her feel, or she's complaining about some situation in life, and I will start to feel that dysregulation. I'll notice that my heart rate increases. I'll notice that my chest constricts some, and in that dysregulation, I now start to want to escape. And for me, I tend to want to fight. So I shouldn't even have said escape. It's more my pattern to want to fight about it. I want to defend myself. I want to make an excuse. I want to lie about whatever it is she's thinking about. All these things are patterns that I've learned over the years for how to, that parts of me have learned. This is how you deal with this particular risky situation. So now that I feel my dysregulation, I feel myself get out of my frontal lobes, I feel, my pupils, constrict, I feel the pressure internally, and now I want to fight. So the big thing for me is learning to feel when I'm dysregulated, and then stop. Don't do any damage. Get out of the situation. Excuse, like for me and my wife, I'll excuse myself and say, honey, I've got to stop this conversation right now. And it's hard to do because you want to fight. You want to be in there. You want to be understood. You want to make your point. But you're going to do damage if you're operating out of that dysregulated state. So the key is stop. Get out of the situation. Ask for a break. Ask for a pause. And then go get regulated. And some of the things you can do for regulation are, first, sit down, be still, and breathe. Breathing deeply in tends to stimulate the nervous system. Breathing deeply out tends to slow it down. So take moderate breaths in, but really concentrate on the breath out to slow yourself down. Remember, breathing is the one thing that you can do where the frontal lobes actually kind of interface with the brainstem and they bridge the brain. So by purposefully controlling the breathing, you can connect the brain back up again. Another thing I like to do is to notice my body when I'm dysregulated. So I stop, I do the breathing, and then I start to feel what I'm feeling. I notice the constriction in my chest. Maybe it's in my back a little bit. I notice my heart rate being a little bit faster, and I just calm that stuff down. I just slow down, breathing out, notice those feelings, and then go through my body and start to purposefully relax the tense muscles. Feel them in my shoulders, relax them a little bit. Feel them in my back and just relax a little bit. Feel them in my butt and in my legs, and just go through my body. Another thing that can help is do a little bit of bilateral stimulation. So possibly on your knees, for example, just do some figure eights on the top of your knees with your hands. I put my hands down on my knees and I just do figure eights on both sides. Something like that where you're actually stimulating both sides of the brain. You're crossing across the brain through that corpus callosum by drawing those figure eights while you're breathing, while you're just feeling your body. And that will help you get regulated again. That helps you get back into the frontal lobes so that you can start making rational decisions again. And you can, that's a way to stop the process before it leads to acting out. When you're highly dysregulated is when generally you're going to move into your acting out behavior. You may remember that, when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that's definitely some of the times when people tend to get dysregulated and those lower brain parts start to jump into the driver's seat and make decisions for us. But it's also when you are signaled that you're at risk, and your lower brain's watching for risk all the time. You don't even really notice it. You're up here in your conscious brain, but that lower middle brain is watching for things that you don't even see. And sometimes you'll feel that anxiety come up and you're like, gosh, why do I feel so anxious suddenly? Well, it's because something's going on in that middle brain that noticed a risk. Somebody said something that could be a subconscious trigger and you're feeling it. So when your body knows it, thinks it's at risk, according to the things that it learned when you were very young, you may have a triggering response and get dysregulated. So learning how to stop and get regulated is going to be an important skill on your journey to recovery. In the future videos, a big part of what I want to talk about here is learning to lead those lower parts of the brain, even when dysregulated, or learning to lead them back into a regulated state, or learning to help them make good decisions, and then eventually retrain them. Part of the healing process is to go back through your early experiences where you learned dysregulating behavior and picked up extreme beliefs and beliefs about yourself, such as I'll never be loved or I'll always be rejected. It's those extreme beliefs that are coupled with these actions where we feel unsafe. There's a lot of those that all of us have, and especially addicts. And so the more we can go back and explore those, we can actually get into those underlying lessons learned and learn new lessons, kind of unlearn the dangerous lesson that causes us trouble and relearn something new. So there is a process or a way to heal these things, to let those middle parts put down their burdens, put down those things that they learned. And so we'll talk about those in the future. But for today, I just want to introduce the ideas of the brain, the upper brain, the middle brain, the lower brain, survival mode, regulation, dysregulation, and learning how to, starting to learn to recognize your dysregulation and learn to take a moment to get regulated again so that you can head off some of that addictive behavior. I look forward to seeing you next video. Thanks for watching this one.